My name is Denise Halloran. I'm 47 years old, and the morning I found out my best friend had been sleeping with my husband, she was standing in my kitchen wearing my robe. Not a similar one. Mine. The cream cashmere one my sister gave me for my 45th birthday, cinched loose at the waist, one sleeve pushed up while she stirred cream into a coffee mug I'd bought at a pottery stall in Asheville. Roy was at the stove in his undershirt, flipping eggs like it was Sunday, like it was ordinary. When Paula saw me in the doorway, she didn't flinch. She just tightened the belt on my robe a little, looked me up and down, and said, "You should have seen this coming, Denise. You're just the numbers person." She said it gently, almost kindly, the way you'd explain something to a child who'd misunderstood a joke. What Paula didn't know, what neither of them knew, standing in my kitchen in the early light, so comfortable, so sure of themselves, was that the numbers person's name was on the deed to that house, on the trucks in the driveway, on the LLC that ran Roy's entire construction business, right down to the last table saw in the shop. She thought she was stepping into my life. She had no idea she was stepping into my paperwork. Let me tell you how I got here. I grew up the daughter of a machinist and a school cafeteria worker in a small town outside Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where nobody's parents had gone to college, and everybody assumed you'd stay close to home. I didn't stay close to home. I got a scholarship to Ohio State, studied accounting because it seemed like the safest kind of smart, the kind where nobody could argue with a balance sheet, and by 26 I had my CPA license and a job at a mid-sized firm in Columbus that mostly did tax work for small manufacturers and family businesses. I was good at it. Not flashy good. Careful good. The kind of good where clients called you at 10 at night because the state was auditing them and you were the only voice that could make their hands stop shaking. I met Roy Halloran when I was 31. He owned a small construction outfit, 3 guys, 1 truck, mostly kitchen remodels and deck additions, and he came to me because his previous bookkeeper had let his quarterly taxes lapse for 2 years running, and the IRS had sent him a letter that made him physically sick to open. I remember him sitting across from my desk, this big, sunburned man with sawdust still in the creases of his knuckles, saying, "I don't understand any of this. I just want to build things." Something about the honesty of that got me. I fixed his mess. I kept fixing it for the next 16 years. We married when I was 33. By then I'd left the firm and started my own small accounting practice, and one of my first and most loyal clients was, naturally, Roy's company, Halloran Construction. It made sense to keep it in the family, and it made even more sense given what had happened to him in his 20s. A bad partnership, a lawsuit from a subcontractor, a bankruptcy filing that had wrecked his personal credit for the better part of a decade. When we started building the business back up together, I did what any competent accountant married to a man with a bruised credit history would do. I structured it clean. The LLC, Halloran Construction Services, LLC, was formed with me as the sole managing member for the simple, practical reason that my credit was pristine and his wasn't, and every lender, every equipment lease, every commercial insurance policy required a managing member whose name didn't make underwriters wince. The trucks were financed in my name. The shop we eventually bought, a pole barn building on 2 acres off Route 40, was titled in my name, with the mortgage under my name and social security number because I was the one who qualified for the rate. Roy always joked about it at dinner parties. "Denise owns everything I've ever built," he'd say, laughing, refilling someone's wine glass. I'd just swing the hammer. People always laughed along. I laughed too. It felt like a joke about trust, not a warning label. For years, that was our rhythm, and it was a good one. I had a habit, a small, unremarkable ritual, but it was mine, of waking at 5:30 every morning, before Roy or our son Colin were up, and brewing a pot of coffee in a French press that had been my grandmother's, dark green ceramic with a hairline crack near the handle that I refused to let anyone throw away. I'd sit at the kitchen table in the quiet, going through the company's books before the day got loud, reconciling the equipment account, checking on the payroll for the crew, making sure the insurance premiums had cleared. It took maybe 40 minutes. It was the part of the day that belonged only to me, before I became somebody's wife or somebody's mother or somebody's CPA. Roy used to come down around 6, kiss the top of my head, and say the same thing almost every morning. "What would I do without you keeping the lights on?" I used to think it was a nice thing to hear. I didn't understand yet that it was also, in its way, an accurate description of our marriage's entire legal architecture. Paula Vance came into my life the way best friends usually do, sideways, through nothing dramatic. We met at a mommy and me swim class when Colin was 2 and her daughter Ashlyn was 3, two exhausted women sitting on the pool deck comparing notes on sleep regressions. Paula was funny in a way that made ordinary errands feel like an event. She'd narrate the grocery store like a nature documentary, do impressions of her husbands that were cruelly accurate, and over 15 years she became the person I called first. When my father died, Paula drove 4 hours to sit with me at the funeral home and didn't say a single wrong thing. When her marriage to her first husband fell apart, I was the one who helped her move her furniture into a 1-bedroom apartment at 11 at night. Both of us too tired to cry properly. We took a girls' trip to Charleston every October. I was going to be a bridesmaid if she ever remarried. She was, in every sense I understood at the time, family. She and Roy had known each other almost as long as she and I had, cookouts, holidays, the 4 of us and our kids treating each other's houses like extensions of our own. For a long stretch, life was, if not perfect, solidly good. Colin went off to college in Bowling Green. The business grew from 3 guys and a truck to a real operation, 11 employees, 3 trucks, a shop full of equipment, a decent contract with a regional home builder that gave us steady work through the winters when residential remodels usually dried up. Roy and I celebrated our 18th anniversary at a bed and breakfast in Hocking Hills, and he gave a toast at dinner that I still remember almost word for word. "Everybody thinks I'm the one who built this company. Denise built the thing that let it survive. I just get to swing the hammer in it." I cried a little into my wine. I believed him completely. It was maybe 8 months after that anniversary that I first noticed something small enough to dismiss. Roy started taking his phone into the bathroom when he showered, which he'd never done before. He started going to the shop on Sunday afternoons to catch up on invoicing, even though invoicing was and had always been my job. When I mentioned this once, lightly, over dinner, "Since when do you do invoicing?" he said, "Just wanted to take some of that off your plate. You work so hard," and reached over and squeezed my hand, and I remember feeling almost embarrassed for having noticed anything at all. That's the strange thing about a good marriage gone wrong. It doesn't announce itself. It erodes so gently that for a long time, the erosion looks like consideration. There was a stretch that spring where things actually did get better, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. Roy started coming home earlier. He surprised me with tickets to a Reds game, just the 2 of us, first time in years. We had a genuinely wonderful weekend at a cabin in Amish country where we didn't check our phones once, and he told me, lying in bed with the lights off, that he'd been feeling like he was disappearing into the business, and he wanted to find his way back to me. I remember thinking, with real relief, that whatever strange distance I'd sensed that winter had simply been a passing thing, a midlife wobble, the kind every long marriage survives. I stopped noticing the Sunday trips to the shop. I let my guard down because I loved him and because for 18 years he had given me no real reason not to. I know now that the reconciliation weekend happened 3 weeks after Paula's second divorce was finalized. By late summer, the small wrongnesses came back, but sharper this time. Paula, who used to text me a dozen times a day, went quiet for stretches and then overcorrected with 2 bright messages about nothing. She canceled our October Charleston trip for the first time in 9 years, citing Ashlyn's college move-in, which didn't add up on the calendar if you actually looked at it, which I eventually did. Roy started going to job walkthroughs on Friday evenings that never showed up on the shared calendar I'd set up for the business years before, the one that logged mileage for tax purposes, the one I still checked every week out of sheer professional habit. I told myself I was imagining a pattern where there was only ordinary busyness. That's what you tell yourself when the alternative is unbearable. The moment it stopped being deniable was small and stupid, the way these moments usually are. I was doing the quarterly reconciliation on the company card in October, my Tuesday night ritual for years, and I found a charge at a bed and breakfast in Hocking Hills, the same one from our 18th anniversary, dated the Friday of a weekend Roy had told me he was at a lumber trade show in Columbus. $420. Booked under the business card, coded as client hospitality, which was the kind of sloppy, arrogant mistake a man makes when he's never once imagined his wife might actually look at the books, because for 16 years, why would she suspect the very thing she'd built? I didn't confront him that night. I want to say that was strategy, but honestly it was shock. I sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother's French press gone cold beside me, and I just looked at that charge for a long time, the way you look at an X-ray before the doctor has told you what it means. The next morning, I called my sister Kathleen. Kathleen is 4 years older than me, a labor and delivery nurse in Cincinnati, and she has never once in her life said a comforting lie when the truth would serve better. I told her about the receipt. I told her about Paula's canceled trip. I told her about the Sunday invoicing and the Friday walkthroughs. Kathleen was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Denise, I need you to start writing things down. Dates, dollar amounts, everything. Not because I think you're wrong. Because if you're right, you're going to need it, and your instinct right now is going to be to talk yourself out of what you already know." She was right about that instinct. She was right about almost everything. Over the next 6 weeks, I did exactly that in a plain black notebook I kept in my desk at the office, not the house. I am, professionally, a person who is very good at finding what doesn't reconcile, and it turns out that skill does not turn off just because the ledger in question is your own marriage. I found 3 more hotel charges between August and November, coded as client hospitality or job site supplies, totaling just over $1,100. I found that the Friday walkthroughs corresponded every single time with nights that Paula's daughter Ashlyn, who is 20 and away at Ohio University, posted on social media that her mother was, quote, having a girls' night in, which was a strange thing to say about a night when, according to my own company mileage log, Roy's truck had traveled to an address 6 blocks from Paula's house and stayed there for 4 hours. Kathleen helped me build a timeline. We sat at her kitchen table one Saturday with a notebook and her laptop, and she pulled up Ashlyn's public Instagram and cross-referenced dates against my mileage log while I sat with my hands flat on the table, feeling something in my chest go very cold and very still, which was, I would learn, the way I process the worst things, not with heat, but with a kind of internal quiet, like a house going dark room by room. Kathleen found a comment from July on a post of Paula's standing in a kitchen that was unmistakably not her own. Granite counters I recognized because I'd helped Roy pick that slab out myself 3 years earlier for a spec house he never actually built and instead put in our own kitchen. The comment from a mutual friend read, "Love your new place." Paula had replied with a laughing emoji and, "Still figuring it out, LOL." Paula did not have a new place. Paula was in my kitchen. I want to pause here and say something directly to you, because I think it matters more than almost anything else in this story. Comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching this from. I'm always amazed at how far these stories travel, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part one still think about the most. By January, I had enough. Not proof of an affair in some legal sense. Ohio doesn't require it for a divorce, and I never planned to sue anyone for alienation of affection, but proof, for myself, that I was not imagining a pattern, that the woman I'd trusted with every private grief of my adult life had been quietly building a second life inside my marriage for the better part of a year. I had $1,100 in misused business funds. I had a mileage log. I had screenshots Kathleen had saved before Paula, eventually, made her account private. I had, more than anything, the settled, quiet certainty that comes not from one dramatic discovery, but from the slow accumulation of 100 small ones, each individually forgivable, together not forgivable at all. Here is where it nearly fell apart. In February, Roy came to me unprompted, which I hadn't expected, and told me he wanted to refinance the shop and one of the trucks to expand the business, bring on 2 more crews for the spring season. He wanted, specifically, to add himself as a co-borrower and co-owner on the LLC, so the bank sees both our names, since I'm the one actually running it day to day. He framed it as a practical correction to an old oversight, something we should have done years ago. He even brought paperwork from our accountant's contact at the bank, already partially filled out. If I signed it, everything I'd quietly built and held, the LLC membership, the property titles, the equipment financing, would become shared, joint, no longer solely mine to control. I understood, with a jolt of real fear, that this wasn't really about expansion at all. If he suspected I was onto him, or even if he simply wanted an insurance policy in case I ever found out, this was how a man protects half of everything before his wife realizes there's anything left to protect it from. My hand was actually shaking a little when I set the paperwork down on the counter, and I remember consciously, deliberately not signing it that night, telling him I wanted our accountant, a colleague named Phil Detweiler I trusted completely, and who, crucially, had never met Paula, to review it first. Roy looked irritated, just for a second, in a way I'd never seen directed at me before. "It's just paperwork, Denise," he said. "You've always been the one who worries about this stuff too much." I told him I'd have an answer in a week. I did not have an answer in a week. I had, by then, already made an appointment with a divorce attorney. The turn, when it came, was not loud. I didn't confront Roy in the kitchen. I didn't call Paula screaming into the phone. What I did, over the course of 11 quiet days in late February, was simple, procedural, and entirely legal because every document I needed already had my name on it. I met with my attorney, a sharp, unhurried woman named Grace Ibarra who specialized in business divorces, and confirmed what I already knew from having drafted the LLC operating agreement myself 9 years earlier. I was the sole managing member. Roy had a W-2 employee's role in a company he did not, on paper, own any percentage of. I transferred the operating account's day-to-day authority to a new account at a different bank, one Roy had no signing access to, effective the same week I filed. I called our commercial insurance broker and confirmed the policies on the trucks, the shop, the equipment were underwritten to me personally as the named insured, which meant I could remove any driver or reduce any coverage without his consent. I did not cancel his access all at once, out of some petty impulse. I simply let his existing authorizations lapse on their normal renewal dates, quietly, the way accounting always does the loudest things without raising its voice. I gave notice on the shop's month-to-month lease-to-own arrangement with the property's prior owner, which had been structured, again, entirely in my name, with an option I chose not to exercise on his behalf. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning, had Roy served that same evening at the shop, and I did not tell Paula anything at all. I let the paperwork do that. I want to be honest that there was one evening, right in the middle of all this, when I sat in my car in the parking lot of Grace's office and cried, not loudly, not for long, just the kind of tired, silent crying that comes after you've held something rigid for too many weeks. And then I wiped my face, checked my mascara in the visor mirror, and drove home to make Colin's favorite dinner for when he came home for his spring break. Because it turns out you can grieve a marriage and still remember to buy the right kind of pasta. The public reckoning, when it happened, was not something I engineered for drama, though I understand, looking back, why it landed the way it did. Halloran Construction had an annual client appreciation dinner every March, a tradition I'd started years ago, held at a banquet hall we rented every year, attended by our biggest homebuilder client, our insurance broker, half a dozen subcontractors, 2 bank representatives, and most of our crew and their spouses, including that year, Paula, who Roy had apparently decided, in the weeks since being served, to bring as his date, publicly, for the first time. I almost didn't go. Grace advised against any appearance of confrontation. But it was my company's dinner, my name on the contracts with every vendor in that room, and I was not going to disappear from my own life because 2 people had decided to be careless in it. Roy stood at the small podium near the bar to give the usual opening remarks he'd given every year, the same easy toast about the crew and the year ahead, and about 20 minutes in, one of the bank representatives, a man named Todd Ferris who handled our commercial line of credit, walked over to where Roy and Paula were standing with drinks in hand and, in the perfectly ordinary tone of someone making small talk, said, "Roy, hey, quick thing, we're going to need Denise to re-sign the line of credit renewal since the primary authorization reset last week. You're not still listed as an authorized signer, is that right?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't meant as one. It was a banker asking a routine question at a client dinner, and it landed in that room like a dropped glass. Roy laughed it off, said something like, "Yeah, that's just Denise's paperwork thing. She handles all that." And I watched Paula's face do something very small and very telling, a flicker of confusion, quickly smoothed over. But then our insurance broker, a woman named Carol and Pruitt who'd known me for a decade, came over separately not 10 minutes later to ask if I'd gotten her email about the policy renewal. "Since you're still the named insured on everything, that hasn't changed, right?" And then one of our own foremen, a good, plain-spoken man named Deshawn who'd worked for us for 6 years, asked Roy in front of several other crew members whether the shop lease had gotten sorted, because he'd heard from the landlord's property manager that the lease-to-own option wasn't getting picked up. 3 separate, unplanned, entirely mundane questions in the space of 20 minutes, each one a small door opening onto the same room. That everything Roy stood in front of that night, the trucks parked outside, the shop the crew reported to every morning, the very line of credit that made payroll possible belonged, on paper and in fact, to me. I watched it happen from a table near the back, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, and I felt no triumph, only a strange, settled stillness, the same cold quiet I'd felt at Kathleen's kitchen table months earlier. Paula finally leaned over to Roy and said something to him, quietly, urgently, and I watched Roy's face change in a way I recognized from 16 years of marriage, the particular tightness he gets when a plan he was certain of turns out to have a hole in it. He looked over at me once across the room. I didn't look away. I set my water glass down on the table, gently, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to break, and I said nothing at all. I let the room keep doing the talking. By the time dessert was served, Paula had already left. Roy stayed another 20 minutes, shook hands with people out of what I can only assume was pure momentum, and then left too, and I stayed until the very end, thanked the staff, and drove home alone with the windows down, even though it was March and 38 degrees outside, because I wanted the cold air on my face the whole way. The divorce took 11 months to finalize, which is faster than most business divorces, according to Grace, because there was so little for Roy's attorney to actually contest. You cannot litigate your way into owning something you were never on paper for. Roy kept his truck, his tools, and roughly 40% of the crew came with him when he started a smaller outfit under a new name the following year. I kept the original business, the shop, the client relationships with the home builder, and eventually sole ownership of a house I sold within 4 months because I didn't want to live in the rooms where I'd once seen my cashmere robe on someone else's shoulders. Paula and Roy stayed together for a while, I heard, through the kind of mutual friends who feel obligated to update you on things you didn't ask about. I don't know if they're still together now. I stopped needing to know sometime around the 2nd year. It's been 3 years since that dinner. I live now in a smaller house, older, with good windows and a kitchen I redesigned myself, smaller counters, less granite, more light. Colin graduated and works in Chicago and calls me every Sunday. My business grew, not shrank, in the years after the divorce because it turns out a lot of women in my town had heard, quietly, through the same network of mutual friends, exactly the kind of accountant I am and exactly the kind of trouble I know how to see coming. I still wake at 5:30 most mornings. I still make coffee in my grandmother's green French press, the crack in the ceramic a little wider now but still holding, and I still sit at my kitchen table in the quiet before the day gets loud, going through numbers, though these days they're almost always someone else's, clients who come to me, more and more often, wanting exactly what I once built without fully understanding why I'd built it, their names on what they'd actually earned. I built my worth long before anyone tried to take it from me, And that's the only part of this story that was ever really mine to keep.